Thank you all for joining us. We're going to have Paul Henning-Kamp, also, or maybe better known as PHK, on annual status report on NSA Operation Orchestra. Welcome.
Thank you. So, a couple of years ago, there was a news item that made me sit up in the chair and think. It's probably not the one you think about now. The director of CIA had his love affair exposed by the FBI because they traced his telecommunication. Being a security researcher, which is not normally something I call myself, is a matter of imagination. In a situation like that, you need to sit back and try to think like the minds who did that. Later on, we got Edward Snowden's disclosures, and I sat down and I thought, what would I do if I have a budget of $1 billion and a mandate, an order to collect as much communication as possible? Then a week ago, I got an email from Philip going like, I need a keynote speaker, what are you doing next weekend? And since I owe Philip a lot of favors, I said, I can do that. And then I sat down and made a set of slides. The basic premise here is that you should imagine a junior NSA staffer arriving in Brussels to give an update to NATO on one of the NSA programs, and then because he's American, he ends up here instead. If I had a lot of time, I would have done the part, you know, the black hair, the sunglasses and all that, but you'll just have to imagine that. So, this is Operation Orchestra, and this is of course top secret, and none of this will exit this room, I'm sure. So, the Orchestra operation has as a primary objective to reduce the cost of gathering information. NSA has, in the law that controls their funding, it says, collect as much information as possible. And as a responsible government agency, we're trying to do it as cost effectively as possible. So, Operation Orchestra is about reducing NSA cost of collecting information. And all of it has to be above board. There's no black ops allowed. Black ops are where you break the laws. And we have no special authorizations. We have no 007 with a license to wiretap or anything of the sort. And the way we do this is we try to eliminate, prevent or weaken encryption. We try to enable access to information, and we try to frustrate players that are trying to make it harder for us. And the history about this is actually a very old program. It started out very soon after the escape of the internet. The internet was meant for the military, it was not meant for grandmother and terrorists and so on. And the big problem with the internet is, unlike the telecommunication network as we knew it, you can plug anything into the internet. You don't have to get approval first. People can build their own computers and hook them up to the network. You couldn't do that with the old telecommunications network. You went to the FCC and you got a little sticker and all this stuff. So suddenly we're in this unregulated network. And there's far too many players in the network. It used to be we'll just talk to AT&T and we could wiretap anybody. And they would happily do that. Now we have, you know, millions of internet networks, and many of them abroad. And we cannot negotiate with all of them. We have to find scalable methods to deal with this. And our attempt to try to manipulate the OSI protocols instead of the TCP/IP protocols unfortunately failed. That would have continued the connection-oriented models of the telephone network, but that didn't work. That was really too bad. The origin of it is the Deep Thought Working Group, which came up with these ideas of trying to gain control of the key leverage points on the internet. There's still some places where things really happen, influence the process to our advantage, and to identify leverage persons where low cost can get a high impact. So one of the new things in operation in the orchestra operation is what we call Abba Operations. And this is a very old problem. Some smart inventor will invent something that makes our life more difficult. And we don't want that. So what do? So the way we used to do this is we would try to bribe him, try to hire him or something. We would classify his patent. So he would get a patent, but he couldn't show it to anybody. Some cases we can swear people to silence, you know, national security, yada yada, the president will give you a handshake and all this stuff. But there's a lot of paperwork involved in this, and it leaves a lot of traces. And involves many people. So it's kind of an expensive process. So we found a new way to do this. We're using the raw capitalism of the market. We're simply throwing money at the problem. So we spot some startup that's going to give us problems. We read Hacker News and all that stuff, of course. So there's this venture capitalist who contacts them. It's like, oh, I saw you on Hacker News. Can I drop by? So this dude drops by and, you know, chats them up and invites them out for a fancy dinner and, you know, drops $10K, like, get some better chairs or something, you know. Keep me posted, right? And now that he knows what they're up to, he comes home and we start looking for a good patent. If we're lucky, this patent is already with one of the friends of NSA, and we drop a line to IBM and for their patent lawyers and say, you should look at these guys because that's awfully close to your patent. And likely as not, IBM will send out a couple of patent lawyers with a clutch of patents, and that startup will be dead. And very often they'll even call the venture capitalist back and say, oh, we're sorry. So we get feedback. We know they're stopped. It's wonderful. And it's like $30K. If the patent is not in what we call good hands, we'll obviously try to find a better patent, or we'll try to get it transferred. There's some very cooperative patent companies out there who will go out and buy a patent so that they can use it on our behalf. It's a very convenient process. We've used some of the same to solve another old problem. We have this problem with people who are working for us in different situations, and we need to reward them. And this used to be sort of kind of bogus operation. You know, they would suddenly win the lottery. Some distant relative would have left them a fortune. We're kind of sorry about the Nigerian scam, but that's kind of how it started. People get amazing job offers. Sometimes new identities, sort of stuff like that. And you have to bend a lot of rules to do that. And it's hard to hide the trails. And Google has made this incredibly difficult. It's like, oh, so you suddenly have this distant relative who left. Why can't we find any traces of this person on Google at all? It's like, right. No, it's much easier today. Hi, I quit. And then he makes a startup, finds a venture capitalist who dumps a couple of millions on him, and then he sits browsing the internet for a couple of years or whatever he wants to do. And that's it. Paperwork is standard. There's a tax form for this. Right? And there's actually, one of these dudes actually ended up making a company that worked. That's like really big. So this is a way to move money into our objectives. This is a way we can move money into people that we want to do things. So in the other end of the scale, speaking of money, we have what we call the overdrive activities. This is about influencing business decisions. We use NSA's contracting. We're a rather big purchaser of IT services. And we can pretty much decide who we give the order to ourselves. There's no fair purchasing when it's national security. And the good thing about contract law is you can do anything. It cannot be directly illegal. You cannot have a contract to kill somebody, but you can do anything that's possible within the law with a contract. And it's a very good mechanism to solve big problems. The bad news is that they're usually very big players, so there's lawyers and it's kind of expensive and stuff like that. And there can be some objective screw, but it's a good way to solve problems. And this is actually how we solve the Skype problem. Skype was peer-to-peer encrypted video and audio. They didn't use standard protocols. they're out of the FTC. We cannot just say, this is illegal, and get them banned. It's not open source. And they did not bite on our attempt to bribe them. It's very popular with independent actors, human rights groups in Belarus, for instance. It's also very popular with political movements adverse to the US cause in the Middle East. And of course, terrorists use it, we're absolutely sure. So first we partnered with eBay, which is a very special friend of NSA. And for some minor considerations in foreign intelligence, they bought Skype for us. Unfortunately, they bungled it. They bought only access to Skype. They didn't get the source code, they didn't get control with the network. So that's sort of like, it's unclear why their lawyers were not briefed. But we didn't get what we want. So we had to try again, but we can't do that while eBay is sitting there. So we get eBay to sell it again at a loss, and now they're not quite as good a friend of NSA. We're working on that relationship. So we got Microsoft to buy it instead, and this time they got all of it. And Microsoft has now changed the architecture of Skype to be centralized. Now Skype goes through Microsoft servers, very convenient, where it will be decrypted if need be. That was a pretty expensive operation, but it was necessary. We couldn't have people communicating outside our jurisdiction. So it's a very big hammer. It requires signatures very high above my pay level. But it's a very good way to do things. And one of the interesting things here is that some of these big players, no matter what they do, it's brilliant. The press will say, we don't understand this, but it's brilliant. It doesn't make sense, but it's brilliant because he's a genius. We know that. So you can do pretty strange things this way, totally in the open, and nobody blinks an eye. We like that. Then we have the Queen activities, and we're working this a lot. So open source and the internet as such is a consensus-based activity, which means anybody can participate. Nobody has special authority. There may be some people who are, the first among equals, yada, yada, yada kind of thing, but it's not like there's somebody who has the letter of the law on his back and can say, I say because law number blah. And it's very much raw consensus and working code, except these days it's more very long, elaborate standards and not very much working code. And there's a heavy international participation, which means that you cannot appeal to people's patriotism. You can't say, for the good of the country, you have to. It doesn't really work. And there's a very significant talent mass, which is a problem, because they will spot things. In theory, all of this belongs under the Secretary of State, because these are foreign relations in many cases. But Foggy Bottom is not really that tech-savvy once it comes to it. And diplomats have absolutely no traction in a setting like the IETF. If you come in with a tie, they kind of look strange on you. And our goals are not they may be misaligned to the Secretary of State's goals. And there are other players involved in this also, which we are not necessarily agreeing with in all kind of things. So it's kind of a tricky space. So what we do is we leverage our existing resources. We have resources embedded with friends of NSA. We have free agents, people who will do things for a consideration. And we have what we call witless volunteers, people who can be manipulated to do our bidding without us ever paying them anything for it. But it's very good, there's no traceability. So what we do is we deploy very carefully designed talking points, memes if we can. We have a department they put a sign on their door saying, PsyOps for nerds. And the idea is to steer discussions in these forums to or from particular topics where we want them. And in general, very often to disrupt consensus building that goes against our purposes. So self-signed certificates in browsers is a very good example. So a self-signed certificate is a certificate I make that says, this is me. So it doesn't really authenticate me in any sense of the word. But if I have that on my web server, you can take your browser and we can establish a secret channel. That's not very good for us because we'll have to spend very expensive resources decrypting that if we ever need to. But it's practically free for people to do this. The only reason why people are not doing this is because we really don't want them to. It would be obvious to be a default on Apache. Just always do a self-signed certificate if that's not a real certificate. So we have spent a lot of time on this one. And some of the talking points, you've no doubt heard these, is like, oh, but secrecy without authentication is pointless. You might be talking to the NSA and you wouldn't know it. Right? We like that one. We're very proud of that one. It gives a false sense of security, right? And the point is, these kind of things, if you tailor them carefully, they speak to people's political leanings. If people are slightly paranoid to begin with, which is what a lot of security people are, this is like, yeah, no, that wouldn't do it. If I don't have a 2048-bit ironclad guarantee that I know who's the other end, it's no good. So today, if you try to go into a web server that has a self-signed certificate, you get these hideous warnings. It's like, oh, you shouldn't do that. This is dangerous. Are you really sure you know what you're doing? Do you have a PhD in this? And the more buttons you press, the more warnings you get, right? Right? By now, grandmother and terrorists are totally turned off, right? And there's one thing in this. Some of our predecessors, we really loved them. Getting certificates to be X509, that was so brilliant. Have you ever tried looking at all this stuff that's in certificate? Nobody understands a word of it. So it's like, no, I don't understand this. Get me out of here, right? So this is a very good example of how the Queen program works. Simply getting people to not do things by misdirecting their attention on it. So amongst the other things we've done in the Queen is that there's no multi-homing without having your own AES number. That means we can always find where all your traffic goes because it always goes through your ISP. We don't need to track you around 7 different sites and stuff like that. There's also no flow routing in IP version 6. When IP version 6 were proposed, there was a very intelligent proposal that said, we shouldn't slam these big addresses into all the packets. We'll just do it in the first packet. And then we'll get a small flow number that says, all the packets in this flow go that direction. But that would be very inconvenient for us because we would have to track all these flow numbers all the time. When you have the IP numbers in the packet, you can just grab all the packets. And you have all the information you need for all time in those packets. You don't need to have all the flow states and know what the flows means in all the ends. That was a very big success. Not that IP version 6 was. It's not really a big problem for us yet, collection-wise. But we're prepared should IP version 6 take off. We've also made it so that there's practically no way compatibly to send encrypted email. Everybody does it their own way. You have to have the same program in both ends because otherwise it doesn't work. And the result is nobody ever uses it. And we managed to delay voice over IP until Skype happened. Voice over IP is a big problem because you cannot automatically search through voice data. It's a lot easier when people send emails. You can just look for patterns and stuff like that. So these are some of the very big successes in the Queen program. Recently, we're working on the HTTP 2.0 standard. There's a very big contingent there that wants everything to be TLS, which would be inconvenient. We're trying to misdirect that. We're trying to screw up that process. And I mean, look at the good side. If we bring them into TLS, we have all the rooted CAs doing our job for us. So we have all the keys if it comes to that, with just man in the middle and all that stuff. But we'd prefer to stay unencrypted if we can. As a fallback, we're trying to push them to some of the broken by design protocols. Unfortunately, one of them seems to have been exposed now, but we're working on getting new ones launched. That's not our department. We just try to push people into that sort of thing. The methods we use is basic fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Playing the GPL versus BSD card still works. It's wonderful. It's like, do they never get tired of that? Yeah, that's some wonderful cryptocode, but no, we can't use it for license reasons. Bike shed discussions, it's so wonderful. Sometimes just one single email from an anonymous person can derail an open source project for months. And we can soak up immense amount of cryptographers' bandwidth with bogus proposals for cryptography. You send this proposal saying, oh, I found this wonderful way to do, and they spent like a month tearing it apart instead of doing real work. So that works pretty well. One of the current focus areas is that there's a push to go from the certificate PKI model to DANE, which is getting your certificates approved through DNS. And this is of course brought on by the fact that people are realizing that everybody has compromised the CA PKI system. I mean, if you look in your browser, there's like 200 approved CAs, and half of them are owned by secret services throughout the world. It's sort of pointless at this point, right? So people want to move that into what's called the DANE protocol. And the idea here is that you validate the certificates using the DNS stack. So you have this signature on the root zone, and that signs the next one, and signs the next one, and signs the next one, and says, my server has the certificate. So you can trust that. Now you only trust this one single key, right? So the advantage of PKI CA is, of course, we have access today, but the DANE project, we really like that, because now we only trust one single certificate, right? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, he said knowingly. And even the best part about this, I don't understand how these supposedly professional people can overlook it. DNS is UDP. It's much easier to do a packet race with UDP than with TCP. They send a DNS request, your answer comes first. Done. This is another interesting program we're working on. It's actually inspired by a field accident. We had to evacuate a high-risk and high-quality resource, and we had no facilities nearby his location that could be used. So we set him up as an independent contractor. Story was, tired of the boss and yada, company politics, yada, yada, start for himself and so on, and was lucky to find some customers and so on. And while sitting there, he spent some time on some open source projects. Had to do something. And he spotted some opportunities for groundwork. So most open source projects are based on trust. There's no formal vetting, there's no checking people's resumes, there's no checking if they're really who they say they are. It's like, oh, I'm this dude who sits in Ulaanbaatar and here's some patches. And if you send good patches for some years, people will start to trust you and not check your patches, and they will give you a commit bit so you can add them yourself, because that's really much easier. It's a fantastic environment that people can come in anonymously. Nobody knows that you're a doc or an NSA agent. So not only can you collect information about the project's interiors that way, but once the trust is in place, you can start to influence their code. So perception is an easy thing to get right here. It's like, yeah, I'm sys at this non-profit thing, and as long as the email works and the printers print, And it's all humming. I mean, I'm sitting here 7 hours a day doing not a shit, right? And okay, cool. Here's a dude who has time, and he's delivering good code. We're cool with that. And one of the things we found out here is that we actually can do, in reality, this is one of our people, right? And he's sitting somewhere in a shop front that looks like it's this non-profit thing for, stopping, I don't know, oak trees falling over or whatever it is. And actually, that's our neighbors who has this kind of shop front. And then need somebody to get the computers to work in this little stealth setup they have. And we need to have an Ethernet and a desk for our man, so it's very convenient. And the bosses can actually claim, oh, we're doing cooperative work and we're saving money and stuff like that. It's really, really, really well. And of course, you cannot go in and add obvious vulnerabilities to source code. People would spot that. It has to be more subtle than that. Programming mistakes. The careless semicolon, yada yada, 0-1 based arrays, all these classics. It's kind of dangerous to do it yourself. It's best to say, oh, I got this patch and I looked at it and it looks okay, and you stick that in. People will start to notice if your own code quality sucks, but if you accept patches which are not quite up to standard, everybody can have a bad day. So in general, obfuscating the code, making it harder to understand critical bits of the code, makes it easier to make it almost do what it was supposed to do. And misleading documentation is always a wonderful thing, particularly for crypto-sensitive stuff. And deceptive defaults, so that things don't do what people think. It doesn't have to be the core code. It doesn't have to be the operating system kernel. In FreeBSD, there's 20,000 packages of software that are built using, there's some patches needed for FreeBSD, yada, yada, yada. Okay, it builds and you have a package. Nobody ever looks at those patches. Whoever ported this piece of software does these patches, he sticks the package in, and that's it. It's never reviewed. It may be if it's a set UID program, somebody may look at it. But in general, nobody has ever looked at all the patches in the FreeBSD port collection. They should. So this is our poster boy, the Debian random number generator. This is really beautifully executed. There's this dude who sends in a patch saying, this gets Valgrind to complain, and I can't see it does anything sensible. You should just remove it. And they did. So for 2 years, all the Debians had lousy random numbers, which made, brute forcing SSL keys and stuff like that. Done. He earned a pretty good bonus. OpenSSL is the crown jewel. OpenSSL is a standard library if you want crypto. Getting SSL to work against all browsers and all that stuff without using OpenSSL is very, very tricky. Reading the OpenSSL manuals or source code is not tricky. That's close to impossible. And that's 300,000 lines of code. So good luck with that. The documentation is deficient and misleading. And the defaults are deceptive. They don't do what you think they do. This saves so much money in collection, you have no idea. So the overall status of Operation Orchestra is it's a resounding success. We spend less than 1/3% of the NSA budget, and it probably cost the collection cost by something like 50%. It's kept most of the internet in plain text. And it's never been exposed. Edward Snowden has no papers on Orchestra at all. You're not going to read about this in The Guardian because it's all buried in boring departments. Operation Overdrive, that's in purchasing. Boys, that's facility management. Abba in Pasadena, that's in personnel. He didn't have access to any of that. Thank you. So the standard reaction in the open source environment to Edward Snowden's disclosures have been, we need to strengthen the protocols. We need to have SSL everywhere. And I think that misses the point by a large margin. The things that have been published of the Snowden documents by now is the thing the general public can understand reading their newspaper. The stuff we would be interested in have not been published and maybe never will. And adding more, attempting to add more encryption is most likely just going to have more broken encryption on the internet. This is not a technical problem. This is a political problem. It must be solved by political means. That means find politicians in your country who can understand this and make sure they understand it. If you cannot find politicians, get you some politicians who can understand it. Political will is a renewable resource. Use your pencil when you vote, or run yourself. This is your children and grandchildren's future society you're looking at. And we're the guys who sort of missed the boat. Do we have time for questions?
Yes, we do.
There's time for questions if anybody wants.
We are going to take questions, and afterwards FOSDEM staff will perform the closing talk. So please don't go away.
Could I ask anybody that's leaving to try and keep it quiet whilst Q&A is going on?
So, one of the biggest security leaks for the OpenSSL, for instance, is actually their documentation and all the stuff people generally say, like, I'd rather be coding.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, OpenSSL is a catastrophe in my eyes and should be thrown out and started from scratch, written in a readable style and documented.
Yeah, I found your last remark very interesting, referring to politics, and especially in FOSDEM. Well, we had this little encounter where it was about politics and FOSDEM, and then the reaction was like, no politics at FOSDEM, it's only about open source. But how would you feel about that, the relationship between open source and politics, apart from what you just said in the end?
I have the same feeling about it I have about global warming. It may be that the open source community doesn't believe in politics. That doesn't mean politics doesn't apply to them. So you can ignore politics, but politics will not ignore you.
Thank you for your awesome presentation. I might have been experiencing with friends some of those situations. I just wonder about the OpenSSL bit, if it's your guess, because maybe there is a little bit of guessing, and I wonder if we should really start having some investigations ourselves as the open source community into these cases. Maybe in the OpenSSL case there is no malignity intended. I'm not sure where you got your analysis.
Show me.
Yes. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting, very inspiring for the NSA wannabes. You mentioned that some of the Snowden documents may never be leaked. Those are your exact words. Why do you think that? Why do you think that the largest leak in basically human history at this point could go quietly under wraps and people will forget about it? Why?
3 reasons. One of them is that Glenn Greenwald is a very responsible person. So there's undoubtedly stuff in there that he will not publish because they would be too damaging for whatever reason. Second, some of them will be so technical that he will not be able to explain them to the readers of The Guardian, much less other newspapers. And third, because I think USA is getting ready to make a deal with Snowden to stop the flow. This has been Chinese water torture for them. Every time they've said something in public, 1 week, 2 weeks later, Snowden document come out showing they're lying. And I think they're kind of tired of that now. So I would be surprised if there is not already now negotiations going on for terms that will allow Snowden to return to the USA in return for the flow of documents to stop. And what the terms will be, we'll probably never know. I presume at some point the documents will just stop and we'll never hear from Snowden again. So I don't think they'll have time to leak all of it, however much it is, not that NSA might know. I mean, the aspect of this that I think is most interesting is that NSA has absolutely no idea what's going on. They know that 4,000 of their employees and contractors have used that data to check up on their love interests. But they know this because people have volunteered the information. They don't know it because they have like log files or anything showing it. So it's a totally leaky bucket with no idea what they're doing. That should be the real scandal. They're not competent.
Well, first of all, thanks for a great talk. I would like to answer you, what is the level on the European level, not just politics in the countries, but on the European level? We saw that, was it CIA or NSA hacking into Angela Merkel's mobile phone? So I don't know, where do we stand there?
I'm pretty sure that they do not have a public relations department that have any influence on that kind of decision. But if they had, I'm pretty sure that public relations department would say, whatever you do not hack into Merkel. Merkel is the one person in Europe you do not want to spy on because she's from the Eastern Germany. They would have been better off not knowing what she said in her phone than having what came out now. I would never have taken that risk if I'd been sitting there. The other thing is that I don't think anybody who thinks they can trust their mobile phone are deceiving themselves. All mobile phones are controlled by everybody else but the guy who has it in his pocket. Same thing goes for iPads, computers, pretty much anything. I don't think we have many devices where we can say this one is by guaranteed not rooted at this point in time. That's one place where the European Union could step in. They could actually go in and mandate computing platforms that can be verified as free from all kind of crap. And Angela Merkel is actually a scientist. She may get the idea behind this, and I could hope that she would do something like that and push it through the European Union. Unfortunately, she's kept busy with the economy in southern EU, I'm told, so I don't know if she has the time. But a good place to go in would be to say, the person who pays for the device controls it, only that person. And tell telcos and people like that to get the fuck out of people's mobile phones.
So, discussing politics, I have a very short remark to make. Techie people usually believe that we can overcome political issues by using technical tools like they are spying on us, now we have encryption, we have Tor, things like that. But that is not actually the question, because of course we can avoid being tracked by doing technical stuff. But the question rather is, do we really want to have a society like that? And I believe that us, as people who understand things more from the technical point of view, should help the rest of the society that doesn't. So I think that this really is a political issue. So there are elections this May in the European Parliament. As a matter of fact, I run for a seat.
I can only agree that this is very much a matter of what kind of society we leave to our kids. Some of the opportunities for goofing around that we had, our kids will never have without having it pasted all over YouTube 10 minutes later. And I realize there's a big, you start thinking differently once you have kids. I have to admit it myself. But I'm pretty sure those of you who have kids will see what I mean when I say this is about what your grandchildren will live in.
Hi. Very good presentation. I was very impressed. So you mentioned the strategy that it's quite easy to disturb important open source projects by just creating some discord over issues that have been problematic issues for a very long time, and then like 10 minutes later you suggest ripping OpenSSL out of everything and replacing it with something that's a new implementation. How is that any different?
Do you think, is it really a controversial opinion to think that OpenSSL is a pile of crap?
It actually, a lot of components in the internet rely on that for encryption. Absolutely. So if you rip that out, it's not getting any more secure. Is it? And it's a controversial issue. You just kind of accepted that in your comment. How's that making anything more secure? I think this is the same kind of strategy that you're suggesting the NSA and other evil forces do with other open source projects.
So how do you know I don't work for NSA?
Exactly.
It's a tricky question, right? And there's a lot of. If you want to take the technical path on it, the FreeBSD ports collection, last time I looked, had 1,342 copies of the MD5 algorithm. That's bogus from a software engineering perspective, right? OpenSSL is sort of the non-solution to that, in that we have this library that has any encryption algorithm anybody has ever thought of, and the defaults will let you use them. All the downgrade attacks in OpenSSL is hilarious, right? So if we want to use technical means to reduce the ability of governmental players to spy on people, we'll have to start acting like grown-up software developers who do things a sensible way, rather than saying, oh, I have this fancy new algorithm, I'll stick it into OpenSSL with the rest of them, so now we have 50. And that would probably require some kind of architectural oversight, which means we'd probably have to find, maximum of 8 persons globally we could agree on, we can probably trust. We can start out with Bruce Schneier and 7 others. But I don't think that the cat herding is up to that level of ability yet. So I simply don't believe we will have technical solutions to this problem. There's always going to be some bunghole somewhere who does something stupid. And you pretty soon run up against some very big companies who has a very big interest in defending certain protocols and stuff like that. So I think OpenSSL is making things worse because people think it works. And people trust it without understanding it. And I met 2 persons who claimed to understand OpenSSL, and one of them was absolutely lying. So yes, I think OpenSSL is a big problem because people think it gives security and it doesn't.
Yes. I agree with you that this is more of a political issue, but I wonder what should I or we ask or try to explain to a politician if I can get hold of one? What is a concrete thing I can suggest yeah.
I think a very good place to start is to demand ownership of our devices.
Technically speaking, should we go and rip out OpenSSL everywhere, or should we start a new SSL stack, or what's our homework? We've just had a weekend of technical inundation. What should we now go and do, other than harassing our politicians?
I don't know.
Fair enough.
And the reason why I don't know is I don't see a technical solution. With $1 billion of budget to collect information, we are not going to be able to stand up to that with any kind of technical solution. I only see political solutions. But I mean, obviously we can write better code, we can stop copying and pasting code we don't understand and use libraries instead of copying and pasting and so on. And that will help. But it's not going to solve the problem. It's just going to close some of the security holes. Which is a good idea, but that's not our real problem right now. So no, I mean, yes, write better code. Should we stop here?
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for this.